All right, so this was my plate from earlier today, and I have to tell you, it was really delicious. A little bit about myself, in terms of my background. I have a teenager and a tween at home, and we travel a lot. And they're really good at spotting really unusual things, or at least unusual for them. And we recently traveled to London and Korea, and they saw these telephone booth, if you remember. And they said, "Dad, what's that?" I said, "That's a telephone booth." "Really? What do? You mean like you take your mobile phone and you go inside and you talk?" I said, no. See, before mobile phones, we had this telephone booth. We go in and you make calls. And the kids just looked at me like, "What? Why didn't they just take out their phone and call instead?" So that's an example of how things change. You know, for those of us that are maybe old enough, maybe we remember Kodak cameras. Remember those plastic paper things? Well, after you take a picture, you have to turn that dial to that next shot. And if you remember, the quality of the pictures are terrible. Well, afterwards, you have to take the film out and make sure you don't expose it to the sun. And then you take that to get it developed at a photo lab. And it would take several days before you could actually get the photos, right? Well, we all know what happened to Kodak cameras, don't we? I mean, smartphones have pretty much decimated cameras as well as video recorders. By the way, raise your hand if you still carry a 35mm camera. Over there. Avoid those people. So these examples demonstrate what happens when disruptive technology displaces status quo. We have a saying in America, "We will eat your lunch," kind of like that plate that you saw. It means that we will defeat you, we will conquer, we will decimate you. With the likes of Motorola, Yahoo, AOL, Kodak, Circuit City, and many more have come and gone to some extent. They used to sit on top of their industry as one of the most valuable companies, but yet they became an acquisition target and were sold for pennies, or just frankly just died slowly. You see, disruptive change has always been a part of human history. But the pace at which it's happening has quickened, which I'll talk about more. And these industries that all of us are in are going to be utterly destroyed, consolidated, and simply bleed to death because of new technologies. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, by 2025, we will know how we've arrived at a technological tipping point in the future when some of these things take place. So for example, 10% of connected wear, like clothing and e-textiles and garments, when those things become smart. So it means that your friends will actually know if you change your underwear or not. When we have robotic pharmacists that may dispense legal marijuana. Or when we have 3D printed cars that are produced in mass scale. To skipping down to the bottom, when we have an AI system that sits on the corporate board of directors. How would you like your chairman to be an AI system? According to McKinsey, a few years back, they did this study. And these are some of the technologies that they found that has the potential to create massive economic impact by 2025. And this was, like I said, several years back, so it's been a little bit dated. And we're in 2016 today, and we know certainly what's happened with mobile. We don't need to be convinced about mobile internet. But right behind mobile are things like automation of knowledge work, the Internet of Things, the cloud, advanced robotics, autonomous vehicles, and so forth. AI and machine learning and big data analytics will handle knowledge-intensive work. This could be the field of education, drug discovery, patent research to investments and finance. The Internet of Things has the potential to drive some $36 trillion in productivity. That's incredible. And from industrial IoT that's able to automate and optimize manufacturing processes to remote telemetry and healthcare services, we're going to create major business transformation. Advanced robotics. Robotics already fairly pervasive in factories, but now it's going to be even more pervasive in places like retail, restaurants, even surgeries, and eventually home and work. Raise your hand if you've heard about robot pepper, for instance. Exactly. And that is being produced on a mass scale that's coming to your home. It has the potential to create $4.5 trillion in economic impact. Driverless car technologies is expected to save some 150,000 lives from fatal accidents. And it has the potential to revolutionize the auto, the trucking, as well as just general public transportation. So, why are AI and robots so disruptive? According to Forrester, AI, robots, and machine learning systems has the potential to displace some net of 7% of US jobs by 2025. That's about 89 million people that's going to be out of work by 2025. Now keep in mind this is a net. There's also new job growth, but this is the net loss. 89 million people. We're talking about office and admin staff, customer service and retail jobs, grocery clerks, to truck and taxi drivers. So all those that are currently employed by Uber and Lyft as independent contractors, in a few years will find themselves out of work again. Because they're going to be severely affected by AI systems, bots, and digital assistants, as well as autonomous robots. Now what this chart shows is that no one is immune from displacement. Not knowledge workers, not senior management, not office workers, or sales and marketing. And if you take a look very closely, what's interesting is that though professional jobs is slower to be affected, when it does begin, it will happen at a faster clip. And that also goes for management. So don't be happy when your boss gets fired because you may get fired first. No one is safe from potential job losses. Not admins, not attorneys, not accountants, not professionals, and certainly not IT workers. Now Gartner projects that there will be some 25 billion connected devices by 2020. Now this figure can go as high as 50 to 200 billion depending on which report you're looking at. Now these are astronomical, just in magnitude alone, whether you're talking about 25 or 200 billion. Earth will have more connected things than people. Now if you attended my keynote yesterday, I went to a lot more depth around the truly destructive force of the Internet of Things. The real story about IoT is not merely about the number of smart things in the future, but rather as inanimate objects and just about everything around us come alive and they begin to transmit data and to communicate. how could that change our society? Think about it. From farmland to streams and rivers and forests and smart cities, hospitals to even the dullest things like the pencils that you're holding, or maybe your shoes that you're wearing. They're going to start to understand itself and to be able to understand its surrounding and to begin to work for you, to orchestrate workflows and tasks on your behalf. Now, moreover, as a society, we're going to become a data-driven economy. That means that from cars, appliances to products, so many of these companies are going to stop charging a lump sum fee for their products. Now, it sounds great, right? Free products? But it's not free. They're going to charge on the back end through usage, through data, and through insights back into the product development. Here what you're seeing is internet penetration, where the darkest regions represents the parts of the world that has some greater than 80% internet penetration. The next tier, which is the next shade of red, that's lighter, represents 60 to 80% of internet penetration. Why this is important is it represents the fundamental infrastructure or the backbone that supports the projected growth of IoT. Now, the hotel that I'm staying at, beautiful hotel, lovely. But one of the biggest challenges that I face is the internet bandwidth. So we as an economy and we as a country need to figure out how to bolster the fundamental infrastructure first to support IoT. Let's switch gears to talk about fintech. Raise your hand if you've ever sent money overseas or had exchange foreign currency. Most of us, right? What do you think about it? Do you think that the fees that they charge you is reasonable? No. I was speaking with an entrepreneur from Mexico City who's very active in entrepreneurship and startups. And he was telling me that remittance, or the money that's wire transferred or wired account to domestic Mexico, accounted for some 70–80%, at least according to him. And do you know how they wire this money to Mexico from abroad? Western Union. Thank you, sir. You have to stand in a long line. And here we are in 2016, and people are still waiting in long lines and paying a hefty fee to send money back home. Fintech is ripe for disruption. And fintech startups like these are challenging every aspect of financial services and capital markets. But it's not without a challenge. According to BI Intelligence, fintech startups have the following issues. Regulation. Financial services is one of the most heavily regulated industry aside from healthcare. Navigating this means the difference between thriving startup versus a startup that never takes off. And perhaps one of the biggest challenges is the fact that big companies are reluctant to adopt new technologies. So if you try to partner with them, if you try to sell your services to them, they're going to be resistant. They're going to be slow to change and to adopt. And in many cases, they're afraid of disruption, but don't necessarily do anything about it. From payments, lending and financing, retail banking, investments and insurance to capital markets, innovative startups are chipping away at the big financial services. Let's talk a little bit about big companies. Big companies are not bad. Let me just make sure you guys understand that. It's just that they're different. Their DNA and their makeup and the structure and the mindset is just different. So let's just kind of get into it a little bit. According to an Accenture study of 1,000 large enterprises, big companies justifiably struggle with innovation. And the biggest barrier is not lack of vision. Let's just be very clear. It's just that by definition, big companies are mature, right? Organizational structures and processes are in place to help the company towards efficiency, not necessarily astronomical, leap-bounding growth. And seasoned managers steer their employees away from discovery and new innovation that's large towards engaging in the science of execution and delivery. Employees are taught to embrace efficiencies, leverage existing assets, and to consistently deliver high earnings to Wall Street. But that also minimizes the type and scale of innovation that can be pursued successfully within an organization. No company has ever created transformational growth by doing just a tiny little bit better and a tiny bit cheaper. Over the last year, we were working with a major publicly traded company. And we finally got to a point where we're just about to kick off the POC for our AI-based data analytics platform called Effective. Well, we had the support of the business unit presidents as well as the executive leadership. And the POC was just a trivial $50,000 USD. Trivial from a US perspective anyways. Mostly just to try out our API services and to integrate it into the platform as a test. Well, somewhere along the line, this approval process went up to a senior manager, high up in the corporate structure. And he said, "What is this? R&D? Innovation? We don't do innovation here." Let me repeat that. We do not do innovation here. Do you think this is an isolated example? No. My computer doesn't like me today. That's okay. I still like you. Now, we know of built-to-last companies like GE, Boeing, IBM. We call them built-to-last because they're no longer managed by the founders. They're a corporate enterprise where they groom executives. And moreover, from time to time, they do a major bet the company, what we call big, hairy, audacious goals. But there are few. Those built-to-last companies are few. Most big companies do not embrace innovation. They think very much like, how do we manage a cash cow? How do we squeeze the last drop of revenue from this product until it absolutely dies? Their definition of innovation is small incremental changes. Now the irony of all of this is that many of these companies spend millions of dollars each year working on the projects that enhance, that extend, and update their current environments and infrastructure. In other words, status quo. But in the end, much of these investments are never going to really pay off. And I've seen this over and over again. Especially when they get completely displaced. Meaning that the very products and services that they've been working so hard to maintain become obsolete, gone, irrelevant. And this is what happened to brick and mortar businesses, bookstores and taxi companies, and now financial services. What they worked on day and night, toiling, struggling to climb that corporate ladder, in a split second, all comes tumbling down. The company's stock drops precipitously. Then your colleagues are fired. And then eventually you're fired. The career that you built for years just simply evaporates. Just look at what happened to Yahoo. Who can tell me what Yahoo was worth at the pinnacle of their corporate life? Anybody? 10, 20 times what they sold for. They recently got acquired for pennies. Pennies. They became basically valueless, aside from Alibaba's stake. If you work for Microsoft, if you work for IBM, or Cisco, or Intel, or any of the major multinational companies, you have seen your colleagues in different divisions being laid off. And the truth of the matter is, there's going to continue to be tens of thousands of layoffs in those corporations. Why? People just don't buy as much servers, mainframes, and desktops. Business is changing. Intel, look at Intel. They missed out on mobile. Now they're trying to grasp onto IoT. Citigroup recently did a study on their own around fintech. And what was really surprising was that even Citigroup recognized that a large percentage of their workforce will be laid off, without jobs, in just a few years. And they're desperate. They're trying everything. They've created an innovation unit that's doing everything from acquiring, investing, developing. They're trying to survive. In an Accenture study, they highlight the key differences between big companies and versus startups. For startups, they're driven by fresh, disruptive, innovative ideas, whereas big companies prefer small, incremental, measured changes. Again, nothing wrong with that, just what they are. It's the fundamental DNA. Similarly, the processes are also very different. Startups follow more of an agile Scrum or Google's rapid 5-day prototype to market test approach. Whereas big companies prefer traditional waterfall or a gradual process to be able to manage the risk. For all these reasons listed above, startups and big companies couldn't be more different. Now, there are companies, big companies, that are trying to innovate. They want to innovate. They recognize that they have to do something, otherwise they will become obsolete. They will lose market share. So they're trying to innovate, but the challenges are some of these that you see up there. They are weighed down by lack of coordination. We've seen it before, right? Where they're trying to coordinate and get buy-in and consensus between stakeholders and functional groups and business units. It's tricky. The development cycles are long and expensive. The environment, frankly, can't support rapid development. One of our clients told us a story where they were about to be acquired a couple of years ago by a very large company. And after months and months of due diligence, the big company decided to not acquire them. Why? They thought that they could do better if they developed that technology themselves. Well, let's fast forward a couple of years. What's happened? They have yet to achieve a fraction of what the startup had achieved 2 years ago. In the meantime, the market has progressed much further. It's more expensive. It takes longer. And by definition, they're risk averse, which means that They avoid bet the farm big bets and ideas because they prefer to minimize risk. And lastly, they just don't have the in-house expertise. They don't have the technical know-how to carry out innovative work. Who on their team have the right composition of AI scientists? Who on their team have the right knowledge of blockchain? Who on their team have the right knowledge of protocols and standards, including customized ones that's coming out of research? Take a look at this list of the world's biggest banks. Many of their market capitalization is above 100 to 200 billion dollars. What's at stake is huge. All of this points to you, the startups. It's not only a massive opportunity in terms of a land grab, but it's also your responsibility in the ecosystem of innovation, because that's what you guys do best relative to large companies. Your comparative advantage is taking on disruptive technology head on. Take a look at this list of $1 billion unicorn startups and private companies. And what's really interesting is take a look at the bottom, the years. Look at the density from 2014 onward. The pace, the speed of innovation has never been faster than before, thanks to open source, platform effect, access to capital, API services. We are creating economic impact faster and faster. Never before are startups well positioned to eat the lunch of big companies in AI, robotics, IoT, fintech, to name just a few. Timing is everything. You are in a unique position to create massively disruptive technologies and to overtake today's incumbents. You may not believe me, but some of you here and watching are going to be the future Google, Apple, Facebook, Uber, Tesla, SpaceX. So let's go. It's time to take off. Thank you. So I think we have a few minutes, so I'll go ahead and take some Q&A, if anybody has it. Yes, there's a gentleman in the back. If we could get a microphone in just a second.
So, do you sense the reluctance to embrace innovation because of fear of job loss in big companies as well as small companies? So, what do you think is the biggest fear of innovation? What keeps people from innovating the most?
So I think the question that he's posing is, whether you're a big company or a small company, what keeps them from innovating? Well, I think you'll find that depending on how you survey these types of companies, they'll give you a different definition of innovation. For large companies, innovating, process re-engineering, incremental change is very much innovation. So if you ask them, are they innovating? They would say, absolutely, we're innovating. Now the question isn't how you define innovation alone, but the question is the scale. Are we talking about an economic impact that's marginal? Or are we talking about $1 billion opportunity? If you're talking about, are you creating innovation that's going to be the next $1 billion revenue? Many times the answer is no. And if you look at the history of the stock market and capitalism, Every 10 years, the companies that you admire will eventually disappear or get consolidated or reacquired. And then a new set of companies will emerge. So most of us think, well, there was no world before Google. There was no world before Apple. But that's not true. Those companies are relatively new. And just like Uber, just like Tesla, just like Snapchat, all of these companies are new. Every 10 years, you're going to have a new emergence. That is the fundamental of innovation cycle. The question and the challenge for all of you is, we are at a very unique position from mobile, from internet, from access to the dissipation of the symmetric information through the knowledge. Now with libraries and API services, all of these things, we can quickly, using Swift, using various programming languages, be up and running and actually have an application live, not in days, not in hours, even minutes. I've seen a demonstration. It works, it's real. The pace of innovation and the distribution of innovation. I'm from Silicon Valley. I recently relocated to New York City. Innovation doesn't happen just in Silicon Valley or New York. Innovation is happening in Serbia. Innovation is happening in South Africa. Innovation is happening in Pakistan. It's happening everywhere. Because now they can access these API services, these libraries, these open source. Everything is accessible. Next question, please.
About the timeline of the unicorns that you showed, I don't have the numbers in my head, but 99% of these companies were born in the developed world, in the Western world that we call it. And I think 95% of them were not cash flow positive until they got external financing or VC money. In our countries, in this region, it's very challenging for us to get access to money. So you need to be profitable before they even look at you, because you need to run a company and you need to bootstrap everything. So that's why you don't see any unicorns from Serbia there, or from Mexico, or from, there's none, because the environment is not friendly for us. What's your take on this? Well, do we need to, all of us, go and live in Silicon Valley, or what's the thing?
All right, so this question is multifaceted, so I'll break it down. The first question is, these unicorns are coming from primarily the US and Europe. Yes or no? Yes and no. Let me explain. One of the greatest things about the United States that I embrace is the fact that, at least historically, we've embraced immigrants. I'm an immigrant. I'm from South Korea, but I live in the US. And the US is my country, as well as Korea. If you look at these startups, most of these startups are not just native Americans or native Europeans. They are from all over the world. They are from your neck of the world. What happens practically is that a startup at an early stage will be formed overseas. But as they start to gain momentum and to seek capital, whether it's from Israel, whether it's from Korea, whether it's from Dubai, they are forced to have to come to Silicon Valley or to London, as an example. So then they create an entity that's based in the US. And their venture capitalists then install managers and sales and marketing. So by the time you get to know them, they are an American company, they are a European company, when in fact, they actually came from overseas. Or the founders and the folks that are contributing significantly are immigrants. Second question was around cash flow positive. So the question is, unicorns became cash flow positive when they received external institutional capital. Not exactly correct. Most of these unicorns are generating cash flow, but some of them are not cash flow positive. They do not have a positive EBITDA or net profits. At an early stage, It's about growth and acquisition. And you're not going to necessarily have that cash. You're not going to be profitable most of the time. The real question that he asks is, how can we in Serbia take advantage of this when we have fundamental and institutional constraints, access to capital, lack of venture capital ecosystem, lack of angels? What do? I, as an individual, will be interviewed by Serbian television today. And my commitment to you is that I will communicate to the policy makers why it's so important to support entrepreneurship. Let me give you a quick story. I come from South Korea. We were also war torn. We were a colony of Japan for many, many years, many decades. Then we went through civil war, where now we have North Korea and South Korea, communism versus democracy. By 1960s, when we came out of that, and of course we had the World War II, we were devastated. You could say that everybody in South Korea were homeless. So how does half of a country become one of the top 10 OECD countries in the world in just less than 60 years or so? How? Human capital. They went and acquired intellectuals and professors from abroad. Then they pour that money into higher education, just like what Serbia is doing. But it takes more. It takes a concerted effort. And this is where government does have an important role. They have to say it is their national policy to be a leader in pharmaceutical, biotech, or IoT, or engineering, or hardware. They have to put a stake in the ground and say, we're gonna make this happen. And that's what Singapore, that's what Korea, and that's what China are doing. Now let's take a look at the rise of China, India, service-oriented. One is manufacturing, the other one is developing and supporting software. Serbia is in such a wonderful state in terms of convergence of all the right variables. Relative low wage, it's a wage arbitrage, price arbitrage. Incredible talent, skill, and high intellectual prowess. Hunger, and determination and resolve, because you have seen war, invasion, to know peace, to have quiet period is relatively new. You guys are fighters. You will survive. So the comment to you is, we have to go back to the government. We have to say, yes, we can be BPOs, we can be outsourcers on a one-by-one cases, but the government has to rally behind this and say, this is how we're going to resurrect this country. Any other question? All right, well, thank you very much.